Hello viewers, welcome back to the Moose Mobile Auto Repair channel, and today I just wanted to give you guys a quick tip on this 2005 Toyota Corolla with a 1.8 liter. This has a 4-speed automatic transmission, the A245E transmission. I replaced the axle seal on the passenger side. The history on this vehicle is that back in 2022 I replaced both axles, the passenger and the driver's side in the front, and because I used aftermarket axles at the time, I believe I used Cardone axles. The one on the passenger side, it went for 3 years, and then I found out that the outer CV boot was torn or ripped open and leaking grease. And so I replaced the passenger side on this vehicle, and after a while at the next oil change service, I found out that the transmission fluid was leaking from the axle seal. Now typically I recommend to replace axle seals, or they also call them output shaft seals, on your vehicle every time you replace an axle, because the issue is that every time you remove the axle out and put the new one in, there's a high likelihood that you could damage the seal in the inside here, because when you insert the axle shaft, it's going to nick and damage the seal, and then shortly after, maybe a few weeks or so, you'll see that transmission fluid is leaking, and then you have to replace the seal. And usually 9 out of 10 times, if you replace axles and you don't replace the seals, the axle seal is going to leak shortly after. Now on some vehicles, they have a kit that comes with a plastic tool, which is an axle seal protector tool that protects the seal while you're installing the axle, so it doesn't do any damage. And so those tools are usually available on the domestic vehicles like Ford and GM vehicles. I don't see them available for like Toyota and other non-domestic vehicles. I've only seen that plastic tool available with the seal on the American cars. Now the issue here is that you have to be careful when you reinstall the old axle, or if you are installing a new one, you have to be careful when you insert it through, because there's a C-clip usually on most of the vehicles, but not all of them, depending on the design. And so you need to be careful that when you're inserting the axle, you really have to be really careful to get it in centered so that you don't damage anything. Now sometimes it's very hard to avoid that, but all in all, the moral of the story here is to replace the axle seals at the same time when you are replacing brand new axles, or when you need to remove the old axle for some reason, because you need to do some work or some related work, and then and reinstall the same axle. So you just need to be careful there. It's kind of a gamble if you don't do the seal, because if the seal leaks shortly after, then you have to do the job all over again. So on this vehicle, I did not want to take everything apart, and so I left the wheel on. I'm just going to show you on what I'm talking about. It saves me quite a bit of time, so I don't need to remove the axle nut from the hub, and also I don't need to pull the wheel off and things like that, so it saves me some time. So right now I'm just in the middle of the job. The control arm is not installed yet, so it's still it's it's disconnected. You can see that the wheel is all the way inwards, and so what I did on this particular vehicle, I removed the lower control arm, the two nuts, and the one bolt on this vehicle, so that I don't need to remove the axle from the hub. And what I did is I left and I rested the axle on top of the transmission here, just to let it sit, and so that way I can install the seal. And so you could use a bungee cord or something to hold it in place. It's resting on the top of the transmission, so this gives me enough room to install the seal. And so I just need to install the axle back, and then that's it. I just need to make sure that I clean the shaft free of dirt and debris, and just install it back. I'm going to show you on how to install the axle back. It's fairly easy. One other thing I wanted to mention before I do the install, I wanted to say that a lot of do-it-yourselfers and also professional technicians, they make this mistake all the time. And so on a majority of vehicles that have the McPherson strut suspension, like this one here, all you need to do is disconnect the lower ball joint and swing the steering knuckle over to get the axle out. I've seen a lot of people, they remove the bolts on the strut tower. They remove the nuts and bolts on the strut tower, and they remove the outer tie rod, and that's completely unnecessary. You're just creating more work for yourself. And so it's just a lot easier to disconnect the lower ball joint and swing it over. The issue here is when you disconnect the strut on the top, that's going to disturb the camber settings for the alignment, and will in turn disturb the toe settings slightly. So when you remove the strut for any reason, it's going to put the alignment out, and so the camber will be off and the toe will be off. Then you need to send the vehicle for a wheel alignment after that. But if you disconnect the lower ball joint and replace the axle then and reinstall it and put this back in, it's going in the same spot, so it's not going to change anything. The toe and the camber settings is going to be exactly the same as what it was before the repair. A lot of people don't know this, so I need to bring this to your attention. And one other thing I wanted to say here is that now in some particular situations, the ball joint on other vehicles that have an all-in-one control arm with the ball joint integrated with it, it may be difficult to remove the ball joint on some vehicles, so I can understand that. So if it's difficult to do that, now the other situation is to remove the bolts on the strut and the outer tie rod end to get the axle out if you're in that situation. But a majority of times, I say maybe like 9 out of 10 times, you should be able to get the ball joint out pretty easily. I've worked on many vehicles in the past with the integrated ball joint, and so it's not too difficult. It takes a little bit of work, but eventually you can get it out. I just find it a whole lot easier to remove the lower ball joint and swing the steering knuckle over, and then you should be fine. It's just a whole lot easier that way than disconnecting the strut and the outer tie rod. Now this works for 90 or 95% of the vehicles on the road today because they have transitioned from the double wishbone suspension to the McPherson strut. But on some vehicles that have a double wishbone suspension, like on some Hondas or Kia, Hyundai, earlier Kia, Hyundai vehicles, probably I think like just over a decade ago, maybe before 2015 or so, 2013, I think the 2012, 2013 or something, depending on the make and model. I know that Hondas have had the double wishbone suspension in the front and also in the rear on some of their vehicles for many years. So in that case, the situation is different because it's not exactly the same as the McPherson strut style design. And so for the double wishbone suspension, you need to remove the upper ball joint, and I believe there's the suspension fork that you disconnect the bolt and the nut from, and you may need to remove probably maybe the tie rod, but I'm not sure. It depends on the vehicle. In that way, you should be able to get the axle out. Now, sometimes you may need to loosen up. The strut mounts on the top, the mounting nuts on some of the Honda vehicles to move the strut a bit to give you some room to pull the axle out, but it really depends on the job. I can't say the exact procedures, but it's something like that. Now they have transitioned to the McPherson strut design because it's more simplistic. There's less parts, less moving parts, and so it's a whole lot easier. And also it's easier on the ball joint too, because the strut is taking most of the load on the suspension than just the ball joint in that particular design. So now I'm just going to reinstall the axle back. Need to push the wheel out. Really need to be careful without damaging anything. You can lubricate the splines. I know in some of my videos I said you can use a little bit of a petroleum jelly. It does not hurt anything. It's petroleum based. So now I'm just going to line this up carefully before I can install the axle back in. Now you can use transmission fluid to lubricate the splines, just to make it a little bit easier to install. But for this vehicle is okay because I have removed the axle multiple times on this vehicle, so it shouldn't be too hard of a job. So now I'm just trying to center the axle up before I can install it. I have mentioned that to position the opening of the C-clip in the 6 o'clock position, the downwards position, so that it'll be easier to get the axle in. You don't have to. It just makes the installation easier because the gravity of the C-clip is pointing downwards and is not sticking out. Because if it's on the other way, the C-clip sticks out slightly, and so it makes it harder to install the axle inside the transmission. So now I'm going to install the axle back. I do have a little bit of an oil leak here. I'm not sure where it's coming from. I just recently had a look at it. I didn't see too much oil in the area. It's all dry from above, so I'm just going to wash it off for now and recheck it for next time. So now I'm just going to install the axle, and then that's it. So now I'm going to install the axle. All you have to do is to push the wheel in to get it in until you hear that the axle snaps into place. I know it's not in because I did not feel it. Really have to center it up to get it in. And sometimes you need to push when you're under the vehicle. You need to push from behind to get it in. Just disconnected the lower control arm again. I had it connected, so I disconnected it. I was just giving myself a hard time for nothing. So now the axle is seated in. See, it's snapped into place now. I just need to wash this off. Wash this area off and clean it down. So now just need to reconnect the lower ball joint now with the wheel on. It can be a little bit tricky to do this with the wheel on depending on the vehicle. Some vehicles may be more difficult. Other vehicles it may be easier because this is the passenger side. You have to make sure that this side is lined up in the transmission as you try to get it in, because this side is the longer shaft, so you need to support it. You need to support the inboard part to make sure it's perfectly centered in the transmission. Otherwise, you won't be able to get it in. For the driver's side, you don't need too much work because the shaft is shorter, so you don't need to worry too much about trying to support it because it's not that long. This one is very long, so you need to support it at the same time when you're pushing the wheel in. So just trying to line up the lower ball joint. You just need to be careful that when you're doing it this way, that you don't damage the boot for the lower ball joint as you are pushing the wheel in, because it could hit against the control arm. Install the two nuts and the one bolt. This is torqued to 66 foot-pounds. This is actually supposed to be a quick video, but I think it's going to be a little bit longer than what it was anticipated. Just going to use the impact to tighten this up a little bit. I'm just going to torque it off camera, just making sure that the wheel spins freely, and that's about it. I'm going to torque this after, and then going to wash everything down. The axle is in now, so we're all good to go. I need to top up the transmission fluid and stuff, and then so I need to top up the transmission fluid and stuff and wash this area down, and that's going to be it. Just making sure that this is locked in place, so you can try to pull back on that inboard joint to make sure it's locked in. And I can feel that it's locked in. It's not going anywhere. It's supposed to move slightly like that, which is normal. So we're all good now. So now I'm just going to conclude the video. I already have a video on replacing both axles and the seals on this same vehicle. I'll post the links somewhere, the description and comments section. There's one other thing I wanted to say, is that I have done this before on my own personal vehicle on the driver's side, and it was relatively a lot easier to do than on the passenger side, because the passenger side CV shaft is a whole lot longer, so you need to support the one end at the transmission side as you are trying to get it in, otherwise it's not going to go in. But on the driver's side, you don't really have to do that, because the driver's side is shorter, so you just need to push the wheel on if you still have the wheel on. Yeah, sure, I was being lazy. I don't want to pull the wheel off. There's no need to pull the wheel off if you don't have to. You're just creating more work for yourself. This Corolla is our family vehicle, so at this particular point it doesn't really matter, but just giving you guys the quick tips for your reference, so that if you ever come across this situation and you don't want to take everything all apart, you can do it this way, and it's perfectly fine. I do know that in particular the transmission guys at various dealerships and other independent shops and transmission shops, they do it this way sometimes. They'll have the wheels off, but they're not going to remove the axle nut if there's an issue with it, because sometimes they don't want to increase the bill by replacing more parts than what is necessary. So if somebody is replacing a transmission, R&R, remove and reinstall, and there's some issues with the axle being seized in the hub, the wheel bearing, they're just going to leave it alone and just pull out the axle from the inboard side out of the transmission and just hang it up somewhere and just leave it like that. They'll use like bungee cords or something to hang the axle up as they work on the transmission to get it out and to put the new one in, or if they are rebuilding it. But in some cases, this situation, it may not work for some vehicles, because having the axle in the way is going to obstruct your way in working on the other things. So sometimes it's just a whole lot easier to take the axle completely out if there's no issues with the axle shaft being seized in the hub. So it really depends on what the circumstances are. Here in this situation, I'm not really doing anything, just replacing the seal and putting the axle back, and that's it. If I were replacing the transmission on this, for instance, I would be removing the axles completely off the vehicle, because it's going to make it very hard to work around in the surrounding areas. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that on some vehicles that I have came across, And some Ford and GM vehicles, they'll have multiple control arm ball joints going to the knuckle. So the lower ball joints, they'll have like 2 lower ball joints at the bottom. So you have to disconnect both of those arms, or on whatever it is connected to the bottom of the steering knuckle. Remove that. In some cases, you may need to remove other components to make it easier to get the axle out and in, because it's going to be a very tight fit. So sometimes you may need to remove, let's say, the 2 control arms at the bottom, the tie rod end, and you might have to remove other stuff to get the axle out. On some vehicles, it's going to be a lot harder, so you probably have to disconnect a few more things. But on most typical basic vehicles with this design suspension, as I showed you, you just need to remove the lower ball joint and you're good, and swing the steering knuckle out of the way, and you can remove the axle then. Because doing it the other way, by removing the strut tower bolts and stuff, you're just creating more work for yourself than you really need. Having said that, I just wanted to say that in service data or service information is going to tell you to remove the lower ball joints on these vehicles. It's not going to say to disconnect the strut tower and the tie rod. It will specifically say to disconnect the lower ball joints. But all in all, to each their own. You can do it on however way is easier for you to do. But that's just the information I wanted to bring out. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.